Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. It's been a few days since we did one of these college hoops transfer portal updates. Forgive me. There is a lot going on in the world of college hoops, and it does feel like the portal has taken a little bit of a step to the side, right? We got Calipari watch at Kentucky. By now, maybe Louisville has a coach. Maybe they don't. The latest is that they're pursuing Richard Pitino. And oh, by the way, there is an NCAA tournament going on. So it's been a while since we've done any sort of portal update. But it's also worth noting that I told you all along, this was the week where things were truly about to get crazy. Because at the end of the day, obviously coming off of last weekend, we had 52 teams eliminated from the NCAA tournament. There are only 16 teams left. And so when you add in all of the new teams whose seasons ended, better teams with better players, plus the coaching carousel where a lot of coaches that were coaching in the tournament are leaving, I told you, I said, this is the week that things are going to get crazy, and they officially have. It's about 7 p.m. Eastern time here on Tuesday afternoon. So if stuff has happened since I posted this update, forgive me, but I want to get you caught up on all the big names that have entered, because this was the day, probably the last 48 hours, where the portal, it really got humming with some really big names that could have some major impact on college hoops next year. Let's go ahead and get to some of the big names that have entered. I think, in my opinion, the biggest one, it is a kid that we actually mentioned on this show probably about 4, 5, 6 days ago. Zeke Mayo, 6'4" guard from South Dakota State. And if you listen to our tourney preview, we were doing a Q&A at the end, and somebody said, what do you think about the Jackrabbits? And I said, well, love South Dakota. I've driven through it. I like the peace and quiet and serenity. But I said, they got this kid, Zeke Mayo. If he decides to enter the portal, will be as regarded and highly coveted as anybody, and that is exactly what happened on Tuesday. Now, it's worth noting, he did also declare for the NBA draft, but let's work under the assumption that he is staying in college hoops, because in my opinion, as of right now, about 7 p.m. Eastern time, again on Tuesday, he is as good as any player who has entered the portal. 19 points per game this year at South Dakota State, about 4 assists per game, 40% three-point shooter. He's just kind of that new age, true lead guard. He's 6'3", 6'4", but he can kind of get his own, but he can get others involved. As I said, he was the Summit League Player of the Year. He was also, by the way, it's worth noting, an All-Summit first-team player a year ago, and there was actually a lot of speculation he was going to leave last year. It was a little bit surprising that he decided not to, but now he is officially in the portal, and I will say this. If he decides to come back to college basketball, it is going to be a race to get this kid on campus and get him into your program. Will be interesting. He is from the state of Kansas. He's from the Lawrence area, so the presumption is that Kansas would be the favorite. I have no intel that tells me otherwise, that we should be thinking anything other than Kansas. But this kid, when he puts out his first list, I guarantee you it is going to include all of the biggest names in college basketball, and now it's just about finding the right fit. What's also worth noting, I think there's an interesting track record of guys going from the Summit League to the power conferences and having success. Grant Nelson this year at Alabama. Baylor Shireman, his former teammate at South Dakota State, was an All-Big East first-team performer. And so remember, he comes from the same kind of lineage as Baylor Shireman, kind of that wide open, pace and space, a lot of three-point shooting in that offense. I think he can get plugged in and play pretty much anywhere in college basketball. Zeke Mayo, in my opinion, the best player in the portal right now. He officially entered on Tuesday. Another big name out of the mid-major ranks. This one is not surprising. Terrence Edwards, 6'6" guard from James Madison. Why it's not surprising is because Terrence Edwards falls under what we just talked about a minute ago. Goes to the tournament, has a high level of success, but when James Madison is eliminated, Mark Byington, their head coach, leaves and accepts the Vanderbilt job, meaning that obviously if you're Terrence Edwards, you sit there and say, let me look at my options. Do I want to stay at James Madison? Do I want to enter the portal? Do I want to go to a high major? And in his case, like Zeke Mayo, do I want to enter the NBA draft? So Terrence Edwards has also entered the NBA draft. I don't know that he's as good of an NBA draft prospect as Zeke Mayo, but I think he does have NBA potential. I also think it will be an insane bidding war if he decides to stay in college basketball. 6'6", average 17 points per game. He's got even a little bit more positional size than Zeke Mayo. And I think the thing that stands out about Terrence Edwards, he was really good in some of James Madison's biggest games of the season. As I said, 17 points, 4 boards, about 3.5 assists per game. But in that season opening win against Michigan State, this was a kid that went to East Lansing and, oh, by the way, dropped a cool 24-5-3 against Michigan State. Had 14-5-2 against Wisconsin in that upset in the opening round of the NCAA tournament, had 13 points against Duke the other day. So this is a kid, he's from Georgia. My presumption will be if he stays in college basketball, I think just about everybody in the SEC will have interest in him. Zeke Mayo is really good, but Terrence Edwards is really good as well. Another guard that I think will have the ball in his hands, will be successful. I'll be fascinated to see where he ends up because I think he has a chance to be really good next year at the power conference level. As I just said, he is a guy who has done it at the power conference level as well. Couple high major guys that I think are worth noting. So last week we talked about a lot of the Stanford guys, Cannon Carlisle, who I think is going to be pursued by everybody. Andres Stojakovic, both from Stanford, will be pursued by everybody. Brandon Garrison, we talked about last week from Oklahoma State. A few high major guys that have certainly caught my interest since they have entered the portal. Let's go ahead and start with Mei Johnson, who, in my opinion, I think you can argue Mei Johnson was the first official, whoa, did not see that one coming guy in the portal. And we get a few of these every year, but for the most part, like the guys who enter the portal generally fit into one of 3 buckets, right? Mid-major guy trying to elevate up, go to a higher level, play at the high major level. You then have high major players whose coaches have gotten fired or left, or you have players whose coaches have left or resigned. So that could be the high major, the mid-major, or whatever. And then generally you have a lot of high major guys that maybe aren't getting very much playing time, want an opportunity to play more. Rarely do you have the high major superstar that decides that he wants to go ahead and see what his options are. Only that's exactly what Mei Johnson did on Monday when he decided to enter. This was a kid who was the leading scorer at South Carolina this year. Remember, South Carolina was good. It's easy to forget now because their tournament was over really quickly. But South Carolina obviously had success in the SEC. They made the NCAA tournament. They ended up as a 6th seed. Well, Mei Johnson was their leading scorer at 14 points per game, 32% shooting from 3, second on the team in minutes played. So you can't sit there and say there was a coaching change. You can't sit there and say that he wasn't getting his run or his shots or whatever. And so what will be interesting about Mei Johnson is one of 2 things. Is he leaving because he is looking for something else? But I also think it's worth noting, is it at all possible that maybe, just maybe, he has decided to enter the portal, maybe just to leverage a little bit more money out of South Carolina? We will see, but he is as good and as established as anybody in the portal. Now, I don't think he's an NBA guy. And if he is trying to leverage more money, I don't blame him because I think, he's one of these kids that realistically, his biggest payday might be coming in college basketball next year as an established guy. Could probably make more playing college basketball next year than playing in the pros. So we'll see what Mei Johnson does. By the way, very interesting note on Mei Johnson. Pete Nakos from On3 pointed this out. As soon as Mei Johnson entered the transfer portal, you know who one of the first entities to comment on his decision was? It was the Ohio State Collective who quote tweeted Joe Tipton's tweet with the little eyeball emoji. And so is Ohio State working behind the scenes? Remember, Mei Johnson began his career at Ohio State. Is Ohio State working behind the scenes to get Mei Johnson back on campus? That's an interesting thought. But I'll tell you, man, again, there's just not many guys that are established that average 15, 16 points per game in SEC play. My guess is he's either leveraging South Carolina for more money, or there's a chance I think he could go back to Ohio State. I think from the Ohio State perspective, there's reason to believe, is it possible maybe he just didn't get along with Chris Holtmann?
I think it's very reasonable to think that he was probably recruited by Diebler, gets to Ohio State, it doesn't work out, decides to leave. Now that Diebler has the head coaching job, he wants to reconsider. Mei Johnson, a fascinating name. Let's stay with a couple other high major guys. Tony Perkins is a late addition, second leading scorer from Iowa this year, led the team in assists, 14 points, 4.5 assists per game. Really good veteran college guard. He kind of reminds me of, ironically, another guy who started his career at Iowa, Joe Toussaint. If you remember, he was at Iowa, then he goes to West Virginia. When Bob Huggins got fired last summer, Joe Toussaint enters the portal and ends up at Texas Tech. But I bring it up because Tony Perkins is kind of the same. Lead guard, veteran guy. He is a fifth-year guy that does have that extra year because of COVID. And when I look at Tony Perkins, I think he's the kind of guy that every college basketball program would love to have. Veteran guard, takes care of the ball, gets others involved, lead guard, played in a power conference. I don't think he's your star, but I think if you're a Gonzaga, if you're somebody like that looking for a secondary ball handler, he's a guy that I think has really high upside. He's from Indiana. Curious if the Indiana schools get involved. Kind of actually feels like a Purdue guy, although obviously we don't expect any of those Purdue guards to be leaving. Tony Perkins is now in the portal as well from the high major ranks. I think there's an interesting name that entered late last week that is at least worth discussing, and that is Kobe Johnson from USC. 6'6" wing. He is the brother of Jalen Johnson. Jalen Johnson currently in the NBA with the Atlanta Hawks. If you remember, he played like a half a year at Duke. It was during that 2019-2020 COVID season. 2020-2021 COVID season, excuse me. He opted out. It was a big national discourse, and he kind of quit on the team and da-da-da. Anyway, this is his younger brother, played the last 2 years at USC. This kid is really good, really athletic, 11 points per game, 6 boards per game, has a couple assists. He's not a great three-point shooter, but he's another one. He's entered the NBA draft, and I think based on intangibles, that's a guy that, to me, I could see the scenario where he does end up getting drafted if he decides to stay in the draft. Now, if he decides to come back to school, he will be pursued by everybody. High major player with success, elite NBA level athleticism. And I'll be curious who would potentially get in the mix on him. Worth noting, by the way, again, the brother played at Duke. I'd be curious. Does Duke make the phone call or not? Because on the one hand, brother played at Duke. On the other hand, brother did not have a great experience at Duke. And I think it'd be really interesting to see what happens there. Couple other names as far as, visits and players that have been in the portal for a minute. One, I think Cliff Omori. I don't remember if he was in the portal last time we did one of these, but listen, veteran big guy, 4-year player, played at Rutgers over the last couple years, finished this past season 10.5 points per game, 8 boards per game. I think we did mention him on the last update that we did last Wednesday or Thursday. I think it was Wednesday we did it. He's in the portal, and I'll tell you, he's heard from everybody. Now, he was supposed to visit St. John's. That fell through. I think a lot of people think that St. John's might have the inside track on that one. But what did I tell you what happened? This could be the classic case of he enters thinking he knows where he's going, and all of a sudden, a bunch of schools that he wasn't expecting have reached out. Kansas has reached out to him. Kentucky has reached out to him as well. Cliff Omori, a name to know. He's going to be able to go pretty much wherever he wants. We'll be curious to see if the visits start to pick up here over the next couple weeks. And then the other big one, a name worth noting for sure, Malik Dia from Belmont, 6'9" forward. Very interesting player. Averaged, how about this? 17 points, 6 rebounds per game, 34% shooting from 3. That's interesting enough at 6'9", but here is where it gets really interesting. 17 points, 6 boards. He did it in 23 minutes per game. So Belmont, I don't know what the end game was with them. They finished in 4th in the Missouri Valley this year. Listen, I'm not here to tell anybody how to coach your team. You got a guy averaging 17 points per game in 23 minutes of play. Maybe find a way to get him some more time on the court. But he has been in the portal, and I thought this was interesting. I thought it was interesting that among the schools that have reached out is UConn. UConn can be very selective in who they take from the portal, but he's kind of that same type player as Alex Karaban, 3rd-year junior Alex Karaban, so 3rd year in the program. I think most people think Alex Karaban is probably going to be back, but is this insurance for Alex Karaban? Do you think you can play him alongside Alex Karaban? Or if UConn ends up making the run that many UConn fans hope for, is there the possibility that Alex Karaban ends up going pro and you need a replacement for him? So Malik Dia, 6'9", 17 points per game, 6 boards, and 34% three-point shooting. I'll tell you this. There's going to be so many more of these portal updates. We're going to do a normal Aaron Torres pod tonight, and we're going to do a lot of coaching carousel stuff. But once the carousel dies down, by next week, we're going to be down to 4 teams. Portal is going to take center stage. But this Tuesday, the 26th, 2 days after that round of 32 ends, that's where it felt like the portal got crazy. Make sure, by the way, you're subscribed to the YouTube channel because we're going to be hitting the portal hard over these next couple months.